Please, sir, my grandmother fell. Her leg is badly hurt. We need help getting home. Please, someone help us. My mother's half sister has fallen and I can't lift her alone.
Can Mom and I stay tonight? Please, sir. Annie said it's freezing out here. Just let my mother and me stay one night. We'll leave in the morning. We don't need a bed. We can sleep near the door. Annie Carter stood at the open iron gate with her arms folded tight against her chest, trying to stop her hands from shaking. The Chicago night was dry, but the cold was sharp enough to make every breath hurt. Behind her, near the stone wall beside the driveway, her mother sat on the curb with one leg stretched out, both hands wrapped around her swollen ankle. Ethan Whitmore hugged his wool coat tighter around himself. "My God," he muttered, pulling his shoulders up. "It's cold." "That's what I'm trying to tell you," Annie said. "It's too cold for my mother." Ethan looked past Annie toward the woman sitting near the wall. From where he stood, Clara's face was hidden by the collar of her old coat. He saw only a tired woman hunched over, trying not to make a sound. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't let you in." Annie blinked. "You can't." "No." He glanced toward the dark windows of nearby houses. "I live here alone. You're a young woman. Your mother is with you, but I don't know either of you. If I let two women into my house overnight and someone sees, there will be questions. She can't walk. I can call the police. They can assist you. Assist us. How? Put my mother on a bench somewhere until morning." Ethan rubbed his hands together. "There's a house next door. Mrs. Bellamy lives there. She's elderly, but she's kind. You could try knocking." "It's after midnight," Annie said. "Nobody's opening their door this late. She might be scared to death seeing two strangers on her porch." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew she was right, but knowing did not make him braver. A porch light flicked on across the narrow private lane. A man in a long robe and winter coat came down the neighboring walk. Arms crossed tight against the cold. He was in his late 60s with gray hair flattened on one side from sleep and slippers that slapped against the stone path. "Ethan," the man called, teeth nearly chattering. "What in the world is going on out here?" Ethan turned, relief and irritation crossing his face at the same time. "Walter, go back inside. It's nothing. It doesn't look like nothing." The neighbor came closer, shivering as he looked at Annie, then at Clara. "Who are they?" Ethan lowered his voice. "They're asking to stay the night. The mother is hurt, apparently. I told them I can call someone." Walter Hale pulled his coat tighter and stepped beside Ethan, not too close to Annie. "Stay the night in your house?" That's what the girl asked. Walter shook his head immediately. "No, no, no. Don't get involved. You don't know where they came from. You don't know what kind of situation this is." Annie's face burned despite the cold. "We're standing right here." Walter glanced at her, then back to Ethan. "I'm not trying to be unkind, young lady. But these days, you can't be too careful. People show up with stories. Next thing you know, lawyers are involved." "My mother is injured," Annie said. "I'm sorry for that. Everybody keeps saying sorry like it's a blanket." Walter looked uncomfortable. Ethan looked toward the house again as if wishing he had never opened the gate. Annie took a breath. "Some men came to our house tonight," she said. "Creditors, lone men, whatever you want to call them. My stepfather borrowed money, gambled it away, and ran off. They said he put our house up for the debt. My mother tried to stop them from throwing our things outside and one of them shoved her. She fell on the steps. Her ankle's bad. We tried the church, the shelter, a motel. Nobody helped. That is where we came from." For a moment, no one spoke. Walter shifted his weight from one slipper to the other. "That's unfortunate." Annie stared at him. "Unfortunate? I mean, it's terrible." "Of course, but Ethan, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Debt collectors, a missing husband, injury, no paperwork you can verify tonight. This could become messy. You should call the police and let them handle it." Ethan nodded slowly, as if the neighbor had given him permission to remain decent, only from a distance. "You hear that?" Ethan said to Annie, not harshly, but firmly. "I can call the police. Or you and your mother may sit there until morning and leave when it's light. But I cannot let you inside." Annie's eyes narrowed. "Sit there until morning. I can't be responsible for whatever story gets made out of this." Ethan said, "If I bring two women into my house at this hour and later one of you says I had bad intentions. What then? If the neighbors talk, if the press hears about it, people like me don't get private mistakes." Annie gave a short bitter laugh. "People like us don't get private pain." Walter frowned. "Young lady, Mr. Whitmore is trying to be reasonable." "No," Annie said. "He's trying to stay clean." Annie held Ethan's stare after she said it. Instead, Ethan looked away first. Walter Hale made a small sound of disapproval. "That's enough now. You can't speak to a man like that at his own gate." Annie did not look at him, then tell him to stop pretending this is about safety. Ethan raised a hand before Walter could answer. "Walter, Please. No, Ethan, Walter said, pulling his robe tighter under his coat. This is exactly what I mean. You give an inch, and suddenly you're the villain because you won't open your home to strangers in the middle of the night. Annie swallowed hard. Anger kept her standing, but fear was still under it, cold and heavy. She glanced back at her mother. Clara had one hand over her mouth now, trying to hide the way pain made her breathe. Her injured foot rested awkwardly on the curb, swollen against the side of her shoe. Annie turned back to Ethan. Please forget what I said. I shouldn't have said it like that. Just let my mother sit inside until morning. You don't even have to let me pass the door. I'll stay on the porch if that makes you feel better. Ethan's face tightened. That doesn't solve the problem. What problem? That she's hurt, that we're black, that I'm 18, that you're rich and somebody might take a picture. Walter muttered. Good Lord. Annie's voice dropped. Sir, I am begging you. Not for money, not for a room with clean sheets. Just one night where my mother isn't sitting on concrete in the cold. In the morning, we'll go. You won't ever have to see us again. Ethan rubbed his hands together, then tucked them under his arms. He was shivering badly now, but his eyes kept drifting toward Clara. I can call an ambulance. She doesn't need a hospital bill. We can't pay. I can cover it. Annie gave him a tired look. Rich people always think covering something is the same as sorrying about it. Ethan went quiet. From the end of the lane came the sudden slap of running feet. All three of them turned. A man stumbled out of the dark, breathing hard, his jacket half-zipped, his hair damp with sweat despite the cold. Ray Carter stopped when he saw Annie, then bent over with his hands on his knees as if he had just escaped a fire. Annie, he had gasped. Thank God. Annie's whole body went stiff. You've got to be kidding me. Ray looked past her at the mansion, then at Ethan, then at Walter. His eyes sharpened. Ray looked past her at the mansion, then at Ethan, then at Walter. His eyes sharpened. He recognized money before he recognized shame. Listen, Ray said, trying to stand straighter. You got to let me in, too. Just for a while. Those men are coming. They're close. I think they followed me from Cicero. Clara lifted her head. Ray, he pointed at her like she had inconvenienced him. Don't start, Clara. I had to move. You think they weren't looking for me, too? Annie stepped between him and her mother. You ran. Ray wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He smelled of whiskey even from several feet away. Girl, don't talk to me like that. I'm the reason you had a roof at all. You're the reason we lost it. Ethan looked at Annie. This is your stepfather. Unfortunately, Ray gave Ethan a quick false smile. Sir, I don't know what she's been telling you, but this is a family matter. We had a misunderstanding with some lenders. Nothing serious. Long as we get a little help. A little help, Annie snapped. They threw us out because of you. They pushed Mama down because of you. She can't walk because of you. Ray's face darkened. Watch your mouth. He leaned closer. You think I don't know what you're doing? You found a rich white man's house and started crying at the gate. Smart, Annie. Real smart. Annie's hand clenched around the strap of the duffel bag. I told him the truth. Ray laughed. Truth. You always did know how to make a story sound sad. Annie turned to Ethan, desperate now, because she could see Walter's expression changing. Could see the neighbor silently deciding Ray's arrival proved every suspicion he had. I told you the truth, Annie said. Everything I said happened. The creditors came. Ray wasn't there. They said he put the house up for his debt. My mother tried to stop them from taking our papers and one of them shoved her. That is why she's sitting there. That is why we're here. I didn't make any of it up. Ethan looked from Annie to Ray. Did you use the house as collateral? Ray spread his hands. It's complicated. That sounds like yes, Walter said under his breath. Ray pointed at him. Stay out of it, old man. Walter stepped back offended and frightened. Ethan, call the police right now. Ray's eyes darted toward the road. No police. Nobody needs police. Annie let out a bitter breath. Now you're scared. I'm trying to keep us alive, Ray said. You mean yourself. Clara tried to stand again. Ray, please just go. Ray looked at her and for 1 second something like embarrassment passed over his face. Then it was gone. I can't go. They'll find me. So you came to hide behind the woman you left on the street? Annie asked. Ethan stepped forward. Enough. The word was quiet, but it carried. Ray looked at him, measuring the coat, the house, the gate. Sir, Ray said, changing his tone. I apologize. It's been a hard night. Let us all come in, warm up, talk like decent people. I'm her husband, Clara whispered. Not for much longer. Ray's head snapped toward her. What did you say? Annie moved at once, blocking his line of sight. Don't look at her like that. Ray took a step toward Annie. Ethan took one too, placing himself between them before he seemed to think about it. Ray stopped. This doesn't concern you. Ethan's eyes were no longer uncertain. A woman is injured outside my home. A young woman is asking for help. And you just admitted men are chasing you over a debt. It concerns me now. Annie looked at him, surprised by the shift in his voice. Walter still hovered near the gate. Ethan, don't be dramatic. Call the police and let this end. Ray cursed softly and backed away, glancing down the road. You people are making a mistake. No, Annie said, you made it. We just got dragged behind it. A sound came from Clara then, small but sharp. She had shifted her ankle by accident, and the pain broke through her control. Ethan turned toward her. He walked to Clara and crouched a few feet away. Ma'am, he said softer. Let me see if you need a doctor. Clara lifted her face. The porch light fell across her eyes. Ethan froze. His hand lowered slowly, his mouth parted, and the name came out like something he had buried and found still breathing. C.L. Annie looked from him to her mother. Clara's face changed. Ethan's voice dropped. Clara Carter. Ray blinked. You know him. Clara closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she looked straight at Ethan. Hello, Ethan. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. And if you believe kindness and truth can change lives, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Walter stared. Ethan, what is this? Ethan did not answer him. He was looking at Clara as if 18 years had stepped out of the dark and sat at the edge of his driveway. Annie's throat tightened. Mama. Clara reached for her hand, but said nothing. Ethan stood slowly, his face pale now for a reason that had nothing to do with the cold. Samuel, he called toward the house. The front door opened and an older black man appeared beneath the entry light. Sir, call drive. Myers, Ethan said. Tell him it's urgent and prepare the downstairs guest room. Ray stepped forward. Hold on. If they're going in, I'm going in, too. Ethan turned to him and there was no hesitation left in his voice. No, you are not. Ray's mouth tightened. That's my wife. Ethan looked at Clara, then at Annie, then back at Ray. And yet she was sitting in the cold while you were running from the men you owed. Ray had no answer. Annie still held the duffel bag against her side. I thought you couldn't let us in. Ethan looked at her. Really? Looked this time and something in his expression broke. I was wrong, he said. Bring your mother inside. Ray stood at the edge of the driveway with his hands half raised as if he could still talk his way inside. Ethan, come on now. Don't do this. It's freezing out here. Ethan did not even look at him. Samuel, close the gate after Mr. Carter leaves. Ray laughed nervously. Leaves where? Those men are looking for me. That sounds like your problem. It became their problem the second they married me. Ray snapped, jerking his chin toward Clara and Annie. Annie turned so fast her duffel bag swung against her leg. No, your debts became our problem. Your drinking became our problem. Your lies became our problem. But you don't get to stand here now and call us family because you're scared. Ray glared at her. Watch your mouth. You first. Samuel stepped between them before the argument could grow uglier. The older man's voice stayed calm, but there was steel under it. Sir, you need to go. Ray looked at Ethan one last time. You really throwing me out while taking them in? Ethan finally met his eyes. Yes. Ray stared at him for a second, then at Clara. You know this man. Clara lowered her eyes. Go home, Ray. I don't have one anymore. He shot back bitterly. Neither did she, but nobody said it. Headlights suddenly swept across the end of the lane. Ray's face drained of color. Oh, hell, he muttered. A dark SUV rolled slowly past the corner. It did not stop, but everyone watched it. The vehicle moved on, disappearing beyond the trees. Ray backed away from the gate immediately. If anybody asks, you didn't see me. Annie folded her arms. That'll be the first honest thing we've done for you all night. Ray cursed under his breath and hurried into the dark without another word. Walter Hale shook his head in disgust. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful, Ethan. This is exactly the kind of chaos I warned you about. Ethan seemed barely to hear him. His attention stayed fixed on Clara. Samuel gently helped Clara to her feet while Annie held her other arm the moment Clara tried putting pressure on her ankle. Pain crossed her face. Easy, Annie whispered. Slow. Clara nodded, embarrassed by needing help. I'm all right. No, ma'am, Samuel said softly. You've spent too much time tonight pretending you are. That nearly broke her. They moved toward the front door. Annie felt strange walking up the long driveway after spending 10 minutes begging outside the gate like someone asking permission to exist. The mansion loomed above them. All warm windows and soft yellow light. She had never been this close to a house like this before. Everything looked too clean to touch. At the door, Walter spoke again. Ethan, I hope you know what you're doing. Ethan turned slowly. Do you remember my mother's housekeeper years ago? Clara Carter. Walter frowned, searching his memory. Then his expression shifted. The young woman your mother fired. Clara stiffened beside Annie. Walter looked between them again, understanding dawning too late. Good Lord. Annie looked at her mother sharply. Mama, Clara whispered. Not here. Ethan opened the door wider. Inside first. Warmth hit Annie immediately. Real warmth. Not bus heat or laundromat heat or the dry air from convenience stores where nobody wanted you staying long. This was the kind of warmth that settled slowly into skin and made your body realize how exhausted it really was. The marble floor gleamed beneath the chandelier. A fire crackled somewhere deeper in the house. Annie became painfully aware of the dirt on her sneakers. Samuel noticed her hesitation. Don't worry about the floor. People matter more. Nobody had said something like that to Annie in a very long time. Clara paused near the entrance table, breathing carefully. Ethan stood a few feet away from her, almost uncertain whether he had the right to come closer. You should sit, he said quietly. Clara nodded without looking at him. Samuel led them into a large sitting room with dark wood shelves and a stone fireplace. Annie helped Clara lower herself onto the couch. The second her mother leaned back against the cushions, her eyes closed from relief. Ethan remained standing near the doorway. Annie looked up at him. Why are you helping us now? The question landed harder than she intended. Ethan answered honestly. Because I know your mother. That's not really an answer. No, he admitted. It isn't. Samuel disappeared briefly and returned with blankets. Annie took one and wrapped it around Clara's shoulders. Her mother's hands were still trembling from the cold. You're safe now, Annie murmured. Clara gave a tired smile. I thought I told you not to trust people too quickly. You also taught me not to leave people behind. Clara looked toward Ethan, then quickly away again. A woman in navy scrubs entered carrying a black medical bag. She was in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a bun and reading glasses hanging from her neck. Ethan, she said. Samuel said someone was injured. Dr. Myers, Ethan replied. This is Clara Carter. The doctor's eyes widened for the briefest second. Clara looked embarrassed. Hello, Drive, Myers. Well, the doctor said carefully, kneeling beside the couch. It seems I missed quite a reunion. Annie noticed the look exchanged between the older adults. Another look full of history nobody had explained to her. Dr. Myers gently examined Clara's ankle. Clara tried not to react, but pain slipped through anyway. It's badly sprained, the doctor said, possibly fractured. She needs X-rays tomorrow morning. She can't afford, Annie began. I didn't ask who was paying. Dr. Myers interrupted kindly. Ethan spoke without hesitation. I'll handle it. Annie opened her mouth to refuse on instinct, but Clara touched her wrist lightly. Not tonight, Clara whispered. Please, Drive. Myers wrapped the ankle while Samuel brought tea and soup from the kitchen. Annie had not realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her. Chicken broth, garlic, fresh bread. Real food. Eat, Samuel said. Annie hesitated. We can't pay for any of this. Samuel looked almost offended. Child, nobody asked you to. She lowered her eyes. Sorry, that word gets overused, too. For the first time that night, Annie almost smiled. Across the room, Ethan still watched Clara in silence. Finally, he said quietly, I looked for you. The room went still. Clara stared into her tea. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. Your mother made sure you stopped. Ethan's jaw tightened. I was told you left. I was fired. Annie slowly looked between them. Mama, what is he talking about? Clara did not answer. Ethan stepped forward at last, his voice lower now, roughened by something heavier than guilt. 18 years ago, he said, your mother worked for my family. Annie frowned. I know that part. There's more you don't know. Clara's eyes closed. Ethan, she whispered, warning him. But Annie was already staring at both of them, feeling something shift beneath the floor of her life. And for the first time since stepping through the gate, Ethan Whitmore looked afraid. Annie looked from Ethan to her mother, waiting for somebody to explain the sentence hanging in the room. There's more you don't know. Clara gripped the edge of the blanket tighter. Not tonight. When? Annie asked immediately. Tomorrow. Next week. After another 18 years. Annie. Clara said softly. No. Annie stood up from the couch too fast. Emotion finally outrunning exhaustion. I need somebody to tell me why everyone in this room keeps looking at me like I'm part of some conversation nobody wants me hearing. Dr. Myers quietly closed her medical bag. Samuel moved toward the fireplace, giving the family space without leaving entirely. Even Walter, who still lingered awkwardly near the doorway, sensed he had become an outsider to something old and painful. Ethan exhaled slowly. Walter, thank you for checking on things tonight, but I think we should handle this privately. Walter looked relieved to escape the tension. Yes, probably best. He paused before leaving. Ethan, be careful. The billionaire gave a tired nod. Walter left and the front door shut softly behind him. The silence afterward felt heavier. Annie folded her arms. Start talking. Clara stared into her untouched tea. There's nothing important to say. That's not true, Ethan said quietly. She looked at him sharply. You don't get to decide that. No, he admitted. I lost that right a long time ago. Annie's eyes narrowed. Okay, enough of this speaking in riddles thing. Did you two date or something? Doctor. Myers coughed into her hand. Clara closed her eyes. Lord. Ethan almost smiled despite the tension. Something like that. Annie blinked. Wait, what? Her mother looked exhausted suddenly, not physically, but in the way people looked when they had spent years carrying a secret too heavy to keep lifting. Ethan was different back then, Clara said carefully. You have to understand that. I don't understand anything. Ethan walked toward the fireplace but remained standing, restless energy moving through him. My family owned a large estate outside the city. Your mother worked there. I cleaned rooms, Clara said flatly. You managed half the house better than anyone my mother ever hired. Clara did not respond. Annie looked between them and Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw. And one night we crossed a line we shouldn't have. The room went quiet enough for Annie to hear the logs shifting in the fireplace. Her eyes moved slowly toward her mother. Mom. Clara's voice came low and tired. You were supposed to never know that part. Annie laughed once in disbelief. Okay, hold on. You're telling me the billionaire whose gate I begged outside tonight used to sleep with you? Annie, Clara warned. No, because I'd really like to know when exactly this conversation was supposed to happen. It happened one time, Clara said quickly. One mistake. Ethan looked at her. It wasn't a mistake to me. She finally snapped her eyes toward him. You disappeared the next morning. Pain crossed his face. I left for New York on a business trip and never came back for me. I came back months later. After your mother fired me. Annie's head turned sharply. She fired you. Clara nodded once. She found out. Ethan's jaw tightened. My mother believed Clara seduced me. Samuel muttered under his breath. Mrs. Whitmore believed every poor person wanted something from rich people. Doctor. Myers gave him a warning look, but she did not disagree. Annie sat back down slowly, trying to fit this new information into the life she thought she understood. So, you worked here. Then what? You found out you were pregnant. Clara stared at the floor. Ethan answered instead. Yes. Annie looked at him. Did you know? No. Clara let out a small bitter laugh. Your mother made sure of that. Doctor. Myers sighed softly. Clara. No. Clara said, lifting her head for the first time in minutes. I spent 18 years keeping quiet. I'm tired. Ethan's expression darkened with guilt. What happened? Clara looked at him like she could not believe he was asking. What happened? She repeated. Your mother told me if I came near you again, she'd make sure nobody in Chicago hired me. She said no one would believe a maid over a Whitmore. Samuel looked away. Doctor. Myers lowered her eyes. Ethan spoke carefully. I never knew any of this. I know, Clara said quietly. That's what made me hate you less than I wanted to. Annie felt her chest tighten. For years, she had imagined her real father as either cruel or dead. Those seemed easier than complicated. So, Annie said slowly. After that, you met Ray. Clara nodded. Years later. He wasn't always like this. Samuel snorted softly. They never are in the beginning. A tired smile flickered across Clara's face before disappearing. Ethan finally sat down across from them. Why didn't you tell Annie about me? Clara looked at her daughter before answering. Because I didn't want her growing up believing she was unwanted. The words hit Ethan hard. I would never have. I know that now, Clara interrupted. But back then, I had no proof. Just a rich man who vanished and a powerful family that wanted me gone. Annie's voice became quieter. So all these years, you knew who my father was. Clara nodded once. And you never told him. Clara's eyes filled slightly, though she fought the tears. I wrote him a letter. Ethan looked up immediately. What? I wrote everything. About the baby. About where I was staying. About how I didn't want money. Just honesty. Clara swallowed. The letter came back unopened 2 months later. Ethan stared at her. I never saw it. I figured that out eventually. He leaned back slowly, stunned. My mother. No, Clara said softly. Your assistants, your lawyers, your family, your world. People like me don't make it very far through gates like yours. That sentence stayed in the room. Annie looked toward the enormous windows, toward the driveway where she had stood freezing less than an hour earlier, begging to be seen as human. Then she looked back at Ethan. You really didn't know about me? No. His answer came instantly. If I had known. He stopped himself. What? Ethan's eyes rested on her face now, really studying it for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. Familiar things he could suddenly see everywhere. I would have come for you, he said quietly. Annie looked down at her hands. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part remembered every empty birthday, every unpaid bill. Every night, Clara cried quietly in the bathroom. Thinking Annie could not hear, drive. Myers stood slowly. Clara needs rest. The ankles swelling more. Samuel nodded. Guest rooms ready. Clara tried to stand, but Annie immediately helped her. Ethan moved too, then stopped himself halfway, uncertain whether he still had permission to care. Clara noticed for one brief second, something softened in her expression. Not forgiveness, just memory. As Samuel helped guide Clara toward the hallway, Annie stayed behind near the fireplace. Ethan rose slowly to face her. Neither spoke at first. Then Annie asked the question both of them were avoiding. If you're really my father, her voice wavered despite herself. What happens now? Ethan did not answer Annie right away. The fire cracked softly between them while footsteps faded down the hallway where Samuel helped Clara toward the guest room. For the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore looked like a man with no prepared response. Annie crossed her arms again, though less defensively now. You're usually this quiet. A faint breath escaped him. No, usually people expect me to know exactly what to say. Well, congratulations. Tonight you don't. You're right. She studied him carefully. Earlier that night, he had been just another rich man behind a gate. Now, every time she looked at him, she noticed something familiar in ways she did not want to notice. The eyes, the shape of his hands, even the way he frowned reminded her of herself when she was trying not to cry. It irritated her immediately. Ethan finally sat down across from her again. The honest answer is, I don't know what happens now. That makes two of us. I know this much. You and your mother are staying here as long as you need. Annie shook her head automatically. We can't. You can. You barely know me. A sad smile touched his face. I'm starting to think that may not be true. Annie looked away first. Samuel returned from the hallway. Miss Clara settled in. I gave her another blanket. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. Samuel glanced between them and seemed wise enough not to interrupt whatever this was becoming. Kitchen still warm. I can make sandwiches. I'm fine, Annie said. Her stomach growled immediately. Samuel nodded as if that answered the question for him. Turkey or roast beef? Annie sighed. Turkey. That's what I thought. After he left, silence settled again. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Did Clara ever tell you anything about me? No, nothing. She told me my real father was educated. That he liked books and jazz music and black coffee. Annie frowned slightly and that he was weak when it mattered most. Ethan absorbed that without defending himself. Fair enough. She never said your name. She had reasons. Annie studied the fire. I used to make up stories about who my father was. What kind of stories? Depends how old I was. She shrugged. Sometimes I imagined he was dead because dead people hurt less than people who leave on purpose. Ethan lowered his eyes. When I got older, Annie continued quietly, I figured he probably had another family somewhere and just didn't want us ruining it. I never married. That surprised her enough to show on her face. Really? Ethan nodded. Came close once. Didn't happen. Why not? He looked toward the hallway where Clara had disappeared. Maybe because some part of me never stopped looking backward. Before Annie could answer, Samuel returned carrying a tray with sandwiches, soup, and tea. The smell alone nearly made Annie dizzy from hunger. You eat first, Samuel told her. Questions later. Annie reached for the sandwich carefully, like someone afraid the offer might disappear. Ethan noticed that, too. Rich men noticed market trends and stock movement. Tonight he noticed the way a hungry girl tried not to eat too fast in front of strangers. You really went to shelters before coming here? He asked. Annie nodded while chewing. One was full, one didn't answer. And then we walked. In this cold, what choice did we have? Samuel muttered from beside the fireplace. Countries full of empty buildings and somehow still no room for poor people. Ethan rubbed a hand across his mouth. You should have never been out there tonight. Annie swallowed slowly. Most people thought we should. That stayed with him. A phone buzzed suddenly on the side table. Ethan glanced at the screen and frowned. Samuel noticed. Business. Unfortunately, he answered the call quietly. This is Whitmore. A sharp male voice carried faintly through the room. Anyway, Ethan, where the hell are you? The Tokyo investors have been waiting 30 minutes. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. David, not tonight, not tonight. We've been preparing this dinner for 3 months. I know. Then get here. Annie looked down at her soup, suddenly aware again that men like Ethan belonged to worlds that did not stop moving because 2 poor women lost a home. There's been an emergency, Ethan said. David laughed once. Your assistant said you brought strangers into your house. Please tell me that isn't true. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Who told you that? The neighborhood talks, Ethan. That's what neighborhoods do. Samuel quietly walked toward the hallway, giving him privacy without really leaving. David continued. Listen carefully. You're a public figure. You can't drag random people into your mansion at midnight. You don't know who they are. Ethan's eyes moved toward Annie. I know enough. Whatever guilt trip they sold you, write a check and move on. Annie stiffened at the words even though she pretended not to hear. Ethan's voice dropped dangerously calm. They're staying. Oppose it. Then David sighed. You always do this. Do what? Pretend you can save people because nobody saved you. The room went still. Ethan slowly stood up and walked farther from Annie before answering. Good night, David. He hung up without waiting for another word. When he turned back, Annie was watching him differently now. What did he mean? She asked. Ethan hesitated. Nothing important. You don't get to say mysterious things either. To his surprise, that almost made him smile. Samuel returned to the room. Miss Clarice asking for Annie. Annie rose immediately. At the hallway entrance, she stopped and looked back at Ethan. You really didn't know about me? No, and if you had, I would have come. She searched his face a moment longer, looking for hesitation, rehearsed guilt, something fake. What she found instead unsettled her more. Regret, not the clean kind people performed in public. The ugly kind that sat deep and permanent. Annie disappeared down the hallway. Ethan remained standing near the fire until Samuel quietly spoke beside him. She has your eyes. Ethan stared into the flames. I know. Samuel folded his hands. Mrs. Whitmore knew too. Ethan looked sharply at him. What? Samuel sighed heavily. Sir, your mother may have fired Clara, but she wasn't blind. The minute Miss Annie was born, everybody who remembered you at 18 could see the resemblance. A coldness moved through Ethan that had nothing to do with the weather outside. You're telling me people knew. Some suspected. And nobody told me. Samuel gave him a tired look. Rich families don't bury scandals with shovels, sir. They bury them with silence. Ethan sat down slowly, the weight of 18 stolen years pressing against his chest. In the guest room down the hall, Annie helped Clara settle deeper beneath the blankets. The older woman looked exhausted. You should sleep, Annie whispered. Clara reached for her hand instead. Are you angry? Annie laughed softly, though her eyes were wet. Mama, I don't even know what I am right now. Clara squeezed her fingers weakly. I wanted to protect you from him, from disappointment. Annie sat quietly for a moment. He looked disappointed, too. Clara stared toward the ceiling. That's the problem with old pain. Sometimes both people carry it. Outside the mansion windows, the cold Chicago night stretched on, but for the first time in years, none of them were alone in it. Annie barely slept. The guest room was larger than the apartment she and Clara had rented before Rye moved them into the little house on Peoria Street. The bed felt too soft beneath her. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender, and every few minutes she opened her eyes just to make sure the ceiling above her was still there. Clara slept in the bed beside the window, though not deeply. Pain kept pulling her awake. Around 4 in the morning, Annie heard her mother whispering something in her sleep. Don't tell him. Annie sat up immediately. Mama. Clara's eyes opened slowly. For a second, she looked confused by the room around her. Then memory returned. You should sleep, Clara murmured. You too. Clara gave a weak smile. Hard habit to break. What? Resting easy. Annie leaned back against the headboard. You really loved him. Clara looked toward the dark window. That's not a simple question. It feels pretty simple. No, baby. Clara's voice stayed soft. Simple as liking someone when life is easy. Loving somebody when the world keeps reminding you exactly where you belong. That's different. Annie thought about Ethan standing outside at the gate, afraid of gossip before he recognized Clara. You still mad at him? Clara was quiet a long moment. I was angry for years. Then life got busy. Bills, work, surviving. Anger takes energy. Eventually, all I had left was disappointment. That sounds worse. It is. A gentle knock interrupted them. Before Annie could answer, Samuel opened the door slightly. Sorry to bother y'all so early. It's okay, Clara said, trying to sit straighter. Samuel stepped inside carrying a tray with coffee, tea, and toast. Dr. Myers called. She scheduled X-rays at 8. End quote. The X-rays 14. The end quote that Clara immediately shook her head. No hospital, it's a clinic. Samuel corrected gently. Private. That sounds expensive. So does walking on a broken ankle. Almost smiled into her tea. Samuel glanced at Clara carefully. Esther's already downstairs. Already? Annie asked. That man hasn't slept right since his father died. Samuel said, tonight won't help. Clara lowered her eyes at that. After Samuel left, Annie studied her mother again. You knew him before he was rich. Rich, didn't you? Clara laughed quietly. No, honey. The Whites were rich before America had traffic lights. Then why'd he look so miserable last night? That question stayed in the room. Downstairs, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen with untouched coffee cooling beside him. The kitchen itself was almost the size of Annie's old house. Stainless steel counters reflected the early morning light, and somewhere a refrigerator hummed softly. Ethan stared at a photograph in his hand. Samuel walked in quietly. You found it. Ethan nodded. The picture was old, edges worn from years in a drawer. Clara stood beside the Whitmore garden fountain wearing her maid uniform, younger and smiling despite trying not to. Ethan stood beside her in rolled sleeves holding a rake badly enough that both of them had laughed right after the picture was taken. You kept it, Samuel said. I thought I threw it away years ago. Some things don't leave just because we hide them. Ethan rubbed his eyes. She wrote me a letter. Samuel stayed silent. I never saw it. No, sir. How many people knew? Samuel hesitated carefully. Enough. Ethan looked up sharply. You knew too. Samuel met his gaze without fear. I suspected and you said nothing. With respect, sir. Back then, nobody around this house listened much to staff unless we were carrying trays. That stung because it was true. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I have a daughter. The words sounded unreal even now. Samuel nodded once. Looks like it. She hates me already. No, Samuel said calmly. She hates what life's done to her mama. Big difference. Footsteps sounded from the hallway. Annie entered first, still wearing the oversized sweater Samuel's housekeeper had found for her during the night. Clara followed more slowly using a cane drive. Myers had insisted on leaving behind. Ethan stood immediately. Clara noticed. So did Annie. Morning. Annie said carefully. Good morning. Nobody moved for a second. Then Samuel cleared his throat. Well, since everybody's standing around awkward, I'm making breakfast. That finally broke some of the tension. Annie sat cautiously at the long kitchen table while Clara lowered herself into a chair. Ethan remained standing too long before realizing he looked nervous and finally sat across from them. The silence lasted until Annie asked. So, what happens after the clinic? Ethan answered carefully. You stay here until we figure things out. Clara shook her head instantly. No, Clara, we are not becoming charity. Annie looked between them. Mama, no. Clara straightened despite the pain in her ankle. One night was already more than we should have accepted. Ethan's patience finally cracked slightly. You were sitting outside injured in 20 degrees weather and we survived. That's not the point. It is exactly the point. Clara met his eyes directly now. People like me survive because we learn not to depend on people like you. The room went still again. Samuel quietly placed eggs and toast on the table without interrupting. Ethan lowered his voice. I'm not asking out of guilt. Aren't you? He paused too long. Clara nodded sadly. That's what I thought. Annie watched them carefully. For the first time, she realized neither of them had really moved on from 18 years ago. They had simply suffered in different directions. A phone buzzed on the counter. Ethan glanced at it and cursed softly under his breath. Business again? Annie asked. He nodded once before answering. Whitmore. This time the voice booming through the speaker belonged to an older woman. Ethan, tell me the neighborhood rumors are false. Every muscle in Clara's body stiffened instantly. Ethan's expression hardened. Good morning to you, too, Mother. Annie slowly looked at Clara. Her mother had gone pale. The woman continued speaking sharply. Walter called me last night. He said, you brought Clara Carter into your home. Samuel stopped cooking. Yes, Ethan answered flatly. A cold silence crackled through the phone line. Then the woman said, after everything that girl caused this family, you still haven't learned your lesson. Annie's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Clara lowered her eyes to the table. Ethan's voice turned dangerously calm. Don't call her that. Excuse me, you heard me. The older woman laughed once without humor. Your father spent years cleaning up the embarrassment she nearly created. Annie looked at Clara in shock. Embarrassment. Clara whispered. Eat your breakfast, baby. No. Annie pushed her plate away. No. I'm tired of everybody deciding what I can hear. Ethan slowly stood from his chair. His mother continued, unaware Annie could hear every word. Throw them out before this becomes another scandal. The billionaire looked toward Clara, then at Annie. Finally, he said the one thing nobody in that kitchen expected. She's my daughter, Mother. The entire room stopped breathing. Silence swallowed the kitchen. Even the soft crackling from the stove seemed to disappear after Ethan spoke those 4 words. She's my daughter, Mother. Annie stared at him. Clara closed her eyes. Slowly, like someone hearing a disaster she had spent years trying to prevent on the phone. Eleanor Whitmore's voice turned dangerously quiet. What did you say? You heard me. That is impossible. It's true. Samuel lowered himself carefully into a chair at the far end of the kitchen, as if his knees had suddenly aged another 10 years. Eleanor laughed once, cold and sharp. Clara told you this, and you simply believed her. No, Ethan answered. I recognized her. Then I started asking questions. Things your family made impossible 18 years ago. Clara finally spoke. Ethan, stop. No. He looked at her directly. Not this time. Annie watched them both, still trying to process the sentence itself. She's my daughter. A part of her had expected denial. Another rich man protecting himself. Another version of Ray. Instead, Ethan looked furious. Not at them, at himself, at his mother. Eleanor's voice rose through the speaker. You are embarrassing this family over the word of a former maid. That former maid raised my child alone while I knew nothing about her. You knew nothing because there was nothing to know. Clara whispered, please. But Ethan was done retreating. Did you intercept her letters? The question hit the kitchen like shattered glass. A pause came from the phone line. Then Eleanor answered carefully. You were young, vulnerable. She was manipulative. Annie pushed back from the table so hard her chair scraped loudly across the floor. Manipulative. Clara stood too quickly from instinct. Pain shot through her ankle and she grabbed the table edge. Mom, Annie said immediately, helping steady her. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Answer the question. Eleanor ignored him. That girl standing in your kitchen right now would not exist in your life if not for your father and me protecting this family's reputation. No, Ethan said, she wouldn't exist in my life because you made sure she didn't. The older woman's silence said enough. Samuel shook his head slowly. Lord, Annie looked at Clara in disbelief. She knew. Clara did not answer fast enough. That means you were telling the truth. Annie whispered. You really wrote him. Yes. And they hid it. Clara's eyes filled slightly. I stopped fighting after a while. Ethan gripped the phone tighter. How many letters? Clara looked down. 3. Something inside him visibly broke. Eleanor finally snapped. Enough. You are not destroying this family over guilt and old mistakes. Ethan's expression hardened completely now. No, Mother. The mistake was yours. Then he hung up. The kitchen stayed still after the call ended. Annie sat back down slowly because her legs suddenly felt unreliable. She looked at Ethan differently now. Not warmly, not trustingly, just differently. You really didn't know, she said quietly. No. Clara sank carefully into her chair again. She looked exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. Samuel rose first, practical as always. Well, everybody still needs breakfast, even during family disasters. Nobody laughed, but the tension cracked enough for breathing to resume. Annie stared at her untouched eggs. So, what now? We just pretend this is normal. There's nothing normal about this, Ethan admitted. That's the first thing you've said today, I fully believe. A faint smile almost touched his mouth before disappearing again. The phone buzzed once more immediately. Ethan looked at the screen and, David again. Your business friend? Annie asked. Yes, let me guess. He thinks we're ruining your reputation. Something like that. Maybe don't answer. He surprised himself by listening. Ethan silenced the phone and said it face down. Samuel nodded approvingly. Look at that. Rich man learning. Clara finally spoke again, her voice tired. This changes nothing. Ethan turned toward her immediately. How can you say that? Because biology doesn't erase 18 years. He absorbed that quietly. Annie looked at her mother. Mama, no, Annie. Clara met her daughter's eyes now. You don't owe anyone forgiveness because they share your blood. Ethan did not defend himself. That mattered more than Annie expected. A car door slammed outside. Samuel frowned toward the window. Too early for deliveries. Another door slammed. Then hard knocking echoed through the front entrance. All 4 of them froze. Annie's face drained instantly. The creditors. Samuel moved first toward the foyer. Ethan stopped him. I'll handle it. No offense, sir, Samuel said calmly. But men like that tend to behave better when another old black man opens the door, looking disappointed in them. Despite everything, Annie let out a startled laugh. Samuel headed toward the foyer with Ethan close behind. The knocking grew louder. Open up. Annie immediately moved beside Clara. Her mother's breathing had quickened. It's okay, Annie whispered, though she was no longer sure of anything. From the foyer came muffled voices. Then one man barked. We're looking for Ray Carter. Ethan's voice answered coldly. He's not here. We know his wife and kid are. Annie's stomach tightened. The man continued. Tell them Ray's debt still stands. Somebody's paying it. Ethan's tone changed slightly then. Dangerous now. Controlled. You threatened 2 women last night. Nobody threatened anybody. You forced them out of their home. That house belongs to the lender now. Ethan stepped closer to the doorway. Then collect your property legally and leave mine. A pause followed. One of the men laughed. You Ethan Whitmore? Yes. Well, damn. The voice shifted instantly into fake politeness. Didn't realize they found themselves a rich protector already. Annie's jaw tightened hearing that word protector. The man kept talking. Listen, Mr. Whitmore. This ain't personal. Rye owes people money, and Clara and Annie don't. Family debt tends to spread. Ethan's patience ended there. If anyone connected to you approaches either of them again, my attorneys will bury you so deep in court costs your grandchildren will feel it. Silence. Then another quieter voice muttered. Let's go. A moment later, tires rolled away from the driveway. Back in the kitchen, Annie sat motionless. Ethan returned a minute later, calm on the surface again. They won't come back, he said. How do you know? Annie asked. Because men like that scare easy once they realize somebody richer is paying attention. Annie hated how true that sounded. Clara looked toward Ethan carefully. You shouldn't involve yourself in this. I already am. That debt belongs to Ray. Ethan looked at Annie, then Clara. No, the damage belongs to him. But the consequences landed on you. Nobody argued because everybody knew it was true. The billionaire sat back down slowly at the kitchen table he had spent years eating alone at. Now his daughter sat across from him, and outside, morning finally began to rise over Chicago. By noon, the house had fallen into an uneasy quiet. Dr. Myers confirmed Clara's ankle was badly sprained, but not broken. Samuel drove her to the clinic himself while Annie stayed behind at Ethan's insistence, though she had argued about it the entire time. I'm not 5, she told him from the kitchen doorway while Clara put on her coat. And your mother still needs one less thing to worry about, Ethan answered. That sounded rehearsed. That's because I've been saying versions of it in my head since 4 this morning. Clara looked between them with an expression Annie could not fully read. Tired amusement maybe or fear at how naturally they argued already. Before leaving, Clara touched Annie's cheek slightly. Behave, Annie snorted. You say that like I'm the dangerous one in this house. Samuel opened the front door for Clara carefully. Trust me, Miss Annie. Rich folks usually dangerous in quieter ways. After they left, the mansion became too still. Annie wandered through rooms that looked untouched by ordinary life. Everything was polished, arranged, expensive, yet somehow lonely. The giant living room had books nobody seemed to read, and a piano nobody seemed to play. She found Ethan in his office speaking sharply into a headset while 3 computer screens glowed around him. No, he said coldly. Delay the merger meeting until next week. A muffled voice answered through the speaker. I don't care what the board thinks, another voice. Then Ethan leaned back in his chair. Because my daughter is more important right now. Annie stopped walking. He had said it naturally this time. My daughter. Ethan noticed her standing there and muted the call. Everything okay? She shrugged. I was looking for coffee. You drink coffee? My mother worked double shifts my whole life. Coffee raised me too. That earned a tired laugh from him. He stood and crossed the office toward a smaller side table where a coffee machine sat beside crystal glasses and untouched whiskey bottles. You take sugar. Depends how bad the day is. He handed her a mug. Then today probably needs 2 spoons. Annie accepted it carefully. Thanks. The office walls held photographs from Ethan's life. Awards, business magazines, politicians, investors, men in suits shaking hands over giant checks. Then Annie noticed one picture tucked farther back on a shelf. A younger Ethan stood beside an older black man wearing overalls and holding fishing poles beside a lake. That's Samuel. Ethan glanced over. Yeah, you 2 fish we used to. A small smile appeared. He's terrible at it. A voice from the headset interrupted loudly. Ethan, are you seriously making coffee during this call? Annie raised an eyebrow. Ethan unmuted. David, unless the building's on fire, I really don't care anymore. That attitude's exactly the problem. Annie quietly started toward the door. Stay, Ethan said unexpectedly. She hesitated. David's voice exploded through the speakers. She's there. Yes, you have got to be kidding me. Annie folded her arms instantly. You know I can hear you, right? Silence. Then David sighed heavily. Look, kid, no offense. Usually people say offensive things right after that sentence. Ethan hid another brief smile. David continued carefully. I'm trying to protect Ethan. From what? Looking human from bad decisions. Annie leaned against the doorway. You mean poor people? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. David groaned. Ethan, this is exactly why boundaries exist. Ethan's expression cooled immediately. I'm ending this call. Fine. But the board's demanding a meeting tomorrow. Your mother called 3 times already and reporters are sniffing around the neighborhood asking questions. Annie stiffened slightly. Reporters. Ethan muted the call again. Don't worry about that. Easy for you to say. He studied her for a moment. You're used to expecting the worst from people. You're not. A faint smile touched his mouth again. Fair point. The call ended shortly afterward. Ethan shut the laptop harder than necessary. Annie looked around the office again. You really built all this with a lot of people helping. That's not what magazines say. Magazines lie professionally. She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound caught both of them off guard. Annie looked away first. Sorry for laughing. For forgetting I'm supposed to be mad at you. The honesty of that nearly knocked the air out of him. You're allowed to be angry. Yeah, but now it's complicated. She stared into her coffee. I spent years imagining you as some monster. Monsters are easier. And what am I now? Annie considered that seriously. I don't know yet. A knock interrupted them. Samuel stepped inside carrying clinic paperwork. Miss Clarice resting upstairs. Doctor said no pressure on the ankle for at least 2 weeks. Ethan nodded immediately. We'll have the downstairs room adjusted for her. Samuel hesitated slightly before adding. There's another issue. What now? That man Rai called the house twice. Annie rolled her eyes instantly. Of course he did. He asked for you. Ethan said no. Samuel looked toward Annie carefully. He asked if Mr. Whitmore planned on paying the debt. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Annie sat down her coffee. Absolutely not. Ethan's expression darkened. How much does he owe? It doesn't matter, Annie said quickly. It matters if dangerous people are involved. She crossed her arms tighter. That debt belongs to Rye. And yet collectors came after you and your mother. That's because people like Rye always hide behind somebody weaker. Samuel nodded quietly. Ain't that the truth? Ethan walked toward the window overlooking the front gates. How much? Annie stayed stubbornly silent. Samuel answered instead. 42,000. Ethan turned sharply. Jesus. Annie looked embarrassed now more than angry. He kept borrowing to cover older debts, then gambling to fix the borrowing. And drinking when the gambling failed, Samuel added. Ethan rubbed his jaw slowly. Why didn't Clara leave him sooner? Annie laughed bitterly. Because poor women don't leave relationships the same way rich people do. That sentence landed hard. She stayed because rent was expensive. Annie continued quietly because she was tired. Because after enough years, people start believing struggle is normal. Ethan stared at her with something close to heartbreak. At that exact moment, voices echoed from the foyer downstairs. Then Clara appeared slowly at the office door using her cane. Behind her stood Eleanor Whitmore. The older woman wore pearls, a cream wool coat, and the expression of someone entering a contaminated building. Annie straightened immediately. Eleanor's eyes landed on her first, and for the first time since entering the house, the older woman looked shaken because the resemblance was impossible to ignore now in daylight. Ethan's eyes, Ethan's posture, Ethan's stubborn jaw. Eleanor recovered quickly. So, it's true. Clara's face hardened at once. You should leave. But Eleanor ignored her completely. She kept staring at Annie. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, she looks exactly like him at that age. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Eleanor Whitmore said it. She looks exactly like him at that age. Annie felt exposed standing there under the older woman's stare, like she had suddenly become evidence instead of a person. Clara moved first. You don't get to walk into this house and talk about her like she's a mistake you recognize. Eleanor finally turned toward Clara. I came because my son announced over the phone that he has a daughter with a former employee. A former employee, Samuel muttered. Funny way to describe the woman your family ruined. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Samuel, mind your place. The older man folded his arms calmly. Spent 40 years in this family, ma'am. I know exactly where my place is. Ethan stepped between them before the argument deepened. Mother, enough. No, Ethan, enough was 18 years ago when I cleaned up this situation. Annie's expression hardened instantly. Situation. Eleanor looked at her directly now. You should understand something. The world my son lives in is not kind to scandals. Scandal. Annie laughed once in disbelief. Lady, my mother got thrown into the street because of a drunk gambler. You think this is the first time somebody's looked down on us? Clara touched Annie's arm, lightly. Baby, no, Annie said, eyes still locked on Eleanor. I'm tired of rich people acting like reputation matters more than people. Eleanor straightened slightly. Reputation built this family and silence nearly destroyed mine, Ethan said. That shut the room down again. Eleanor looked at her son carefully then, perhaps noticing for the first time that something fundamental had shifted in him overnight. You're serious about this, she said quietly. She's my daughter. You have no proof yet. We can get proof, Annie interrupted before Ethan could answer. I'm not scared of that. Eleanor's eyes moved toward her again. For a moment, something almost human softened there. Regret, maybe, or age finally colliding with consequences. You have your father's stubbornness, she admitted. Guess I inherited it honestly. Samuel covered a cough that suspiciously sounded like laughter. Clara, however, looked exhausted by all of it. Eleanor, please, we didn't come here for money. That remains to be seen. Ethan's patience snapped. Stop. The single word cracked through the office hard enough that even Eleanor looked surprised. I spent 18 years not knowing my child existed because everybody around me decided wealth mattered more than truth. His voice stayed controlled, which somehow made it harsher. You don't get to insult Clara in this house anymore. Eleanor stared at him. You're choosing them over your own family. Ethan answered immediately. They are my family. Annie looked down quickly after that because something inside her chest moved in a way she did not trust yet. The silence broke when another phone buzzed. Samuel frowned at the screen. Unknown number. Probably reporters, Ethan muttered, but Samuel's expression changed after listening briefly. Actually, it's the police. Everyone stiffened. Samuel handed the phone over. Ethan answered calmly. Whitmore. A male voice spoke quickly through the speaker. Ethan's face darkened with every sentence. What happened? Clara asked quietly. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Ray was arrested this morning. Annie closed her eyes. Of course he was. What for? Samuel asked. Fighting in a parking lot outside Cicero. Ethan paused. And possession of stolen checks. Clara sank slowly into the nearest chair, not shocked, just tired. The officer's voice continued faintly through the phone. Mr. Carter requested someone notify his wife. Annie laughed bitterly. That's funny. He remembered he had one. Ethan thanked the officer and ended the call. Clara rubbed her forehead. I can't do this anymore. Annie knelt beside her immediately. Mama, I spent years trying to hold together a man who kept falling apart. Clara's voice shook now from exhaustion more than emotion. And now all of this. Ethan crouched carefully a few feet away. You don't have to handle it alone anymore. Clara looked at him with old pain in her eyes. You can't fix 18 years overnight. I know. No, Ethan, I don't think you do. She looked around the giant office. People like you think help arrives quickly because it always has for you. But some damage sits inside people too long. He accepted the hit quietly because it was deserved. Eleanor watched the scene with growing discomfort. Not because Clara was wrong, but because she was beginning to realize her son believed every word. Annie stood again slowly. I need air. Clara reached for her hand. Baby, I'm not leaving. Annie shook her head. I found out in 12 hours my real father's a billionaire and my grandmother hates me. I need a minute. Without waiting for an answer, she walked out. Ethan moved instinctively to follow. Clara stopped him softly. Don't. He looked back. She needs one place in this house that isn't watching her. That landed harder than she intended. Annie stepped onto the back terrace. Overlooking the frozen garden, snow clung lightly to the hedges and stone paths. The air hit her face sharp and cold. She leaned against the railing and let herself breathe. A few minutes later, Samuel quietly stepped outside carrying a wool coat. Your daddy sent this. Annie almost corrected the word daddy before stopping herself. Samuel draped the coat over her shoulders anyway. Cold sneaks up on people when they upset. You always talk like that. Like what? Like somebody's grandfather in a movie. Samuel grinned. That's because I'm old. Annie laughed softly despite herself. They stood in silence a moment. Then Annie asked quietly, was he really a bad person back then? Samuel thought carefully before answering. No, just young. Rich boys get raised believing the world handles consequences for them. Sometimes it does and my mom paid for it. Yeah, Samuel sighed. She did. Annie stared out over the garden. You think he really cares? Samuel answered without hesitation. That man ain't slept, eaten, or breathed properly since realizing who you are. She looked down. But Samuel added gently, love arriving late don't erase pain arriving early. Both things can be true. Inside the office, Eleanor gathered her purse stiffly. You're making a mistake, she told Ethan quietly. He looked toward the terrace windows where Annie stood wrapped in his coat. No, he said, I think I finally understand which mistake was mine. By evening, the house no longer felt like a place hiding from the truth. It felt like a place waiting for it. Snow drifted slowly outside the windows while Samuel prepared dinner downstairs. Clara rested in the guest room after finally agreeing to pain medication. Ethan spent most of the afternoon canceling meetings, ignoring reporters, and arguing with lawyers over the phone. Annie noticed all of it. She also noticed he checked on Clara every hour without entering the room unless invited. That mattered, too. Around 7, Samuel found Annie sitting alone in the library, pretending to read titles she could not focus on. Dinner's ready. I'm not hungry. That family trait came from your father, too. Annie glanced up despite herself. He skips meals. When stressed, man forgets food exists. She closed the book in her lap. You really think this is going to work? Samuel leaned against the doorway. Depends what you mean by work. This Annie gestured vaguely around the mansion. As suddenly becoming some weird family after 18 years. Samuel smiled faintly. Child families been becoming weird overnight since the beginning of time. That almost made her laugh again. The dining room felt smaller with only 4 people in it. Ethan sat at one end of the table but not the head, almost deliberately avoiding the position. Clara noticed immediately but said nothing. Samuel served bowls of beef stew and fresh bread before finally sitting too after Ethan insisted. Nobody's waiting on anybody tonight, Ethan said. Samuel pointed his spoon toward him. Careful, you keep talking like regular people. Your investors gone panic. Clara hid a smile behind her glass. It was the first real smile Ethan had seen from her in 18 years. That hit him harder than any argument. Dinner stayed quiet at first until Annie looked toward Clara. The police said Rye had stolen checks. Clara sighed heavily. I didn't know about that, but you knew about the gambling. Yes, and you stayed. Clara lowered her spoon slowly. People always ask women why they stayed after things fall apart. Nobody asks how tired they were before that. The room went still. Annie softened immediately. Mama, I didn't mean I know. Clara reached over and squeezed her hand. You spent years protecting me from him, too. That changes people. Ethan watched the exchange quietly. The love between them was obvious, worn down, but solid, built through survival instead of comfort. He suddenly understood how much he had missed. Annie caught him staring. What? Nothing. He hesitated. You sound like her sometimes. Clara looked down at her plate. Annie frowned slightly. That a compliment? The highest one I know. Silence followed again, though gentler this time. Then Clara surprised everyone by speaking directly to Ethan. Your mother used to hate when staff sat at the same table. Samuel snorted. Mrs. Whitmore hated a lot of things. Ethan rubbed his forehead tiredly. You don't have to defend her. I'm not. Clara studied him carefully. That's new. He nodded once. I spent a long time thinking loyalty meant obedience, and now I think loyalty without kindness is just fear wearing a suit. Samuel let out a low whistle. Boy finally grew up at 50. Even Clara laughed softly at that. The sound settled warmly around the room. Then the front doorbell rang. Everyone stiffened instantly. Ethan stood first. I'll get it. Annie rose too. I'm coming. You don't have to. Neither do you. They walked together toward the foyer while Samuel muttered, nothing good ever come from nighttime doorbells. Ethan opened the door carefully. 2 reporters stood outside beneath the porch lights with cameras and microphones. Mr. Whitmore, is it true an unidentified young woman has moved into your home? Is she connected to your family? Are rumors about an illegitimate child accurate? Annie's face hardened immediately. Ethan stepped partly in front of her without thinking. Leave, sir. The public has a right. No, they don't. One reporter spotted Annie over Ethan's shoulder and lifted a camera. The flash exploded across the foyer. Annie flinched hard. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Cold, controlled, dangerous. Put the camera down, he said quietly. The reporter hesitated. Ethan stepped forward onto the porch. You photograph her again, and every publication tied to your company loses access to Whitmore Holdings permanently. Try me. The second reporter lowered his microphone first. We're just doing our jobs, Sway. That answer shut them up. After a tense moment, they finally backed toward the driveway. Well, be in touch, Mr. Whitmore. No, Ethan said. You won't. He closed the door firmly. Annie stood frozen near the staircase. You okay? He asked. She shrugged too quickly. I'm fine. You hate cameras. I hate people looking at me like I'm some story. Ethan nodded slowly. I know the feeling. No, you don't. Her voice sharpened suddenly. People looked at you and saw success. They look at people like us and see mistakes. That one hurt because it was true, too. Ethan leaned against the closed door. Annie, what? I can't undo 18 years. She looked away. But nobody gets to treat you like you're something shameful. Not reporters, not my mother, not me. Annie swallowed hard. Upstairs, Clara appeared slowly at the landing, holding the railing for support. What happened? Reporters, Annie answered. Clara closed her eyes briefly, like she had expected this from the beginning. They'll tear you apart, she whispered toward Ethan. He looked up at her, then let them try. The conviction in his voice surprised all 3 of them. Samuel appeared from the dining room holding a dish towel. Everybody's still alive. For now, Annie muttered. Samuel nodded. Good. Because I made peach cobbler and I refused to let emotional trauma waste dessert. That broke the tension enough for Clara to laugh again. Later that night, after Clara returned to bed and Samuel retired downstairs, Annie found Ethan alone in the kitchen rinsing dishes despite the massive untouched dishwasher beside him. You know, rich people usually pay somebody for this part. I know. He dried a plate slowly. I needed something quiet. Annie leaned against the counter. Those reporters going to keep coming. Probably. You regret letting us in yet? Ethan stopped drying the plate. Then he answered honestly, no, I regret not opening the gate sooner. Annie stood in the kitchen doorway after Ethan said it. I regret not opening the gate sooner. The sink water continued running softly between them. Somewhere upstairs, an old pipe clicked inside the walls. The house sounded less empty now. Less careful. Annie folded her arms against the counter. You really mean that? Ethan shut off the water and dried his hands slowly before answering. I spent 18 years missing my daughter. I'm trying not to waste more time pretending otherwise. The word daughter still felt strange in the room. Not wrong, just unfinished. Annie looked down at the floor. I don't know what I'm supposed to call you. Ethan blinked slightly. You don't have to call me anything you're uncomfortable with. That wasn't really an answer. He leaned against the counter opposite her. When I was a kid in boarding school, there was this old groundskeeper named Frank. Everybody called him sir because he was old and grumpy. A small smile touched his face. One day he told me, respect means more when people choose it instead of being forced. Annie listened quietly. So Ethan continued, call me whatever feels honest. She nodded slowly. Okay, Ethan. It stung more than he expected, though he hid it well. Not because she was wrong. Because he had no right yet to want more. Annie noticed anyway. You wanted me to say, Dad. He gave a small breath of laughter. Yeah, I think maybe I did, but I haven't earned it. That answer stayed with her. Upstairs, a door opened softly. Clara appeared at the edge of the hallway, wearing one of Samuel's old wool cardigans over her nightclothes. The cane tapped gently against the floor as she approached. You two still awake? Couldn't sleep, Annie answered. Clara looked between them carefully. Everything okay? Annie shrugged. Define okay. Clara smiled faintly at that. Then her expression shifted toward Ethan. Your mother called me. His face hardened instantly. When just before dinner. I didn't mention it because I was tired. What did she want? Clara lowered herself carefully into a chair. To offer money. Annie rolled her eyes immediately. Of course, she did. Ethan's jaw tightened. How much? Enough to disappear quietly. The kitchen went still. Annie stared at her mother. You serious? Clara nodded once. She said she'd arrange an apartment, medical coverage, even college money for you. And all we had to do was vanish. Annie asked bitterly. Clara looked toward Ethan quietly. She thinks protecting family means controlling damage. Ethan stared at the counter so long Annie thought he might break it with his hands. What did you tell her? He asked finally. Clara's answer came calm and steady. I told her, poor people get tired of being paid to stay silent. Something shifted in Ethan's face then. Pride maybe, or grief. Annie moved beside her mother and squeezed her shoulder gently. Good. Clara looked at her daughter carefully. I almost said yes. Annie blinked. What? I'm tired, baby. Clara's voice shook slightly now. Tired people start thinking. Survival and peace are the same thing. Ethan stepped closer instinctively. You don't have to run anymore. Clara looked at him with old sadness. You still don't understand. Women like me never stop thinking about the exit. That sentence stayed with all of them. The next morning, reporters crowded outside the gates before sunrise. Samuel looked through the security monitor and muttered, Lord, they multiplying. 3 vans parked along the street. Cameras waited near the sidewalk. One reporter held coffee while rehearsing lines into a microphone. Annie stared at the screen. Beside him, they really care this much. They care because rich folks having secrets makes poor folks feel less lonely, Samuel answered. Ethan entered the security room already dressed for work, though he clearly had no intention of leaving the house. Security's tightening the gates. That's ridiculous, Annie said. We're not celebrities. You are now. She hated how calmly he said it. Clara entered more slowly behind them. Her face tightened the moment she saw the cameras. I knew this would happen. Ethan turned toward her immediately. Nobody's forcing you to speak to them. They'll follow Annie. They won't get close enough. Annie crossed her arms. You can't solve everything with security guards. No, Ethan admitted. But I can make harassment expensive. Samuel grinned quietly. Now that sounded rich. A buzzer sounded from the front gate. Everyone froze again. Ethan checked the monitor. Ray Carter stood outside looking exhausted, bruised, and furious. Annie whispered, You've got to be kidding me. Ray pounded the gate again. Open up. Samuel sighed heavily. Man got the survival instincts of a shopping cart. Ethan's expression darkened. He's not coming inside. But Ray spotted the camera and shouted louder. I know she's in there. Clara. Annie. Clara closed her eyes immediately. Ray continued yelling. Those reporters outside heard enough already. How long before they hear the billionaire stole another man's family? Annie went pale with anger. He didn't even raise me. That won't stop headlines. Clara whispered. Outside, reporters immediately swarmed closer toward the gate. Microphones lifted like weapons. Ray pointed dramatically toward the mansion. That rich man thinks money makes him better than everybody else. Ethan muttered under his breath. This is exactly why I hate public attention. Ray kept shouting. He broke my home apart. Annie snapped. Your gambling broke your home apart. Her voice echoed louder than she intended through the intercom speaker. Every reporter outside turned instantly toward the gate camera. Ray looked stunned for half a second before recovering. Baby girl, don't let these people turn you against family. You did that yourself. Ethan looked toward Annie carefully. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. She stepped closer to the intercom. Her hands trembled, but her voice stayed clear. You left my mother on the street. Reporters scribbled furiously now. You borrowed money behind her back. You drank away rent money. You disappeared while she got hurt, trying to protect what little we had left. Ray's face twisted angrily. You ungrateful little don't. Clara warned sharply beside her. Ray laughed bitterly toward the cameras. Look at this. Soon as rich people show up. Suddenly, I'm the villain. Ethan finally stepped toward the speaker. No, he said calmly. You became the villain when 2 women feared homelessness less than staying beside you. That silenced even the reporters for a moment. Ray stared at the camera, breathing hard. Then something ugly crossed his face. You think she's really your daughter? He said toward Ethan. You rich idiots believe anything when guilt gets involved. The room went cold. Annie looked toward Ethan instinctively. For the first time since all this began, Doubt flickered briefly across Ethan's face, and Clara saw it immediately. The room stayed frozen after Ray's words. You think she's really your daughter? Outside the gates, reporters leaned forward like wolves catching blood in the snow. Annie slowly turned toward Ethan and Clara saw it immediately. Not disbelief, not rejection, just one brief human flicker of uncertainty. 18 stolen years, hidden letters, a mother who lied. A world built on secrets. Doubt was inevitable, but it still hurt. Clara stepped back first, not dramatically, quietly, like someone used to leaving before humiliation fully arrived. Clara, Ethan started. She lifted a hand. Don't. Ray saw the movement on the security monitor and smiled cruelly outside the gate. See, even she knows. Shut up, Annie snapped. But Clara's face had already changed. Not angry now, just tired in a deeper way than before. Samuel looked toward Ethan sharply. Boy, say something. Ethan looked at Clara immediately. I believe you. The answer came fast enough to matter, but Clara still looked wounded. You hesitated because he blindsided me. No, her voice stayed calm. Because part of you still hears your mother. When you look at me, that landed cleanly because it was true. Ethan took a step toward her. Clara, listen to me. Outside, Ray kept yelling for the reporters. Ask him for a DNA test. Ask the billionaire if he's stupid enough to raise another man's child. Annie looks sick now. Can somebody please get him away from here? Ethan's expression hardened instantly again. He hit a button on the security panel. Call the police. Samuel nodded and reached for the phone, but Clara suddenly spoke. No. Everyone looked at her. She straightened slowly despite the cane. No more running. No more hiding. Let him say whatever he came to say. Ray heard her through the speaker and laughed. Finally, Clara stared directly into the monitor camera. You want the truth, Ray? He smirked. Go ahead. You were never Annie's father. That silenced the driveway. Even the reporters stopped moving. Ray's smile faded slightly. What? You knew from the beginning. Clara's voice stayed steady now. I told you before we got married. Annie turned sharply toward her mother. Mama. Clara's eyes filled, but she kept going. Ray promised he didn't care. He said he'd help me raise you anyway. Ray slammed a fist against the gate. I was drunk. You were honest. Clara shot back. That's the difference. Ethan stared at the screen. Samuel slowly lowered the phone. Outside, reporters exploded into motion again. Mr. Carter, are you denying paternity? Did you know all these years? Ray looked trapped suddenly, cornered by his own bitterness. I raised her. No, Annie said quietly. Mama raised me. That hit harder than shouting. Ray looked at her like he wanted sympathy and realized too late he had already spent it all. Clara's voice softened then, almost sadly. You could have still been family if you'd chosen love over pride. Ray looked away first and everybody inside the house knew the fight had ended. Police arrived minutes later. The officers recognized Ethan immediately and handled Ray carefully but firmly. By then, the reporters had enough material to flood every evening broadcast in Chicago. As Ray was escorted toward the patrol car, he looked back one last time toward the mansion. Annie stood visible behind the front window beside Clara. Ray lowered his eyes, not because of Ethan, because of them. After the police left, silence settled over the house again. A quieter silence this time, not fear. Aftershock, Clara sank carefully into the living room chair near the fireplace. Annie sat beside her immediately, holding her hand tightly. Ethan remained standing near the windows. I'm sorry, he said finally. Clara looked exhausted. For which part? For all of it. She studied him for a long moment. Then she gave a small tired shake of her head. You can't apologize your way backward 18 years. I know, but Clara hesitated slightly. You stayed. Ethan looked at her. When things got ugly, she continued quietly. You stayed. Those words meant more than forgiveness. Annie leaned back against the couch cushions and let out a long breath. Well, guess my life officially became a daytime talk show. Samuel walked in carrying fresh coffee and snorted. Honey, daytime television ain't got writing this messy. That finally pulled a real laugh out of her. The sound warmed the room. Ethan looked toward Annie carefully. There's still the DNA test. Annie nodded slowly. Yeah, you don't have to do it if you're uncomfortable. She looked at him for a long moment. Are you? No. Good. Because honestly, Annie shrugged slightly. I already know. Clara's eyes softened. Ethan almost smiled. You do. Annie pointed between them. You both get stubborn when emotional. It's terrifying. Samuel laughed loudly enough to echo through the room. 3 weeks later, snow still covered most of Chicago when the DNA results arrived. Positive 99.98% probability. Ethan Whitmore was officially Annie's biological father. But by then, the paper mattered less than it should have because something else had already happened inside the house. Annie no longer knocked before entering Ethan's office. Clara no longer looked for exits every time the phone rang, and Ethan no longer ate dinner alone. The reporters eventually lost interest. New scandals replaced old ones. Business headlines returned. Eleanor Whitmore never apologized properly. Though one quiet afternoon she mailed Annie a handwritten letter admitting fear had made her cruel. Annie read it twice before setting it aside. Forgiveness takes time, Clara told her gently. Good, Annie answered. She's got money. She can afford patience. Samuel nearly choked, laughing. One cold evening near Christmas, Ethan found Annie asleep on the living room couch with textbooks spread across her lap and the television still glowing softly. He stood there watching her for a long moment. 18 years missed. And somehow, against reason, against pride, against everything built to keep people apart, life had returned his daughter to him through a locked gate on the coldest night of the year. Annie stirred awake slightly. You staring at me again? Ethan smiled, just making sure the gate stayed open this time. Annie looked at him sleepily for a second. Then naturally now, without hesitation or fear, she answered, Good night, Dad. This story reminds us that money can build walls, but it cannot heal loneliness, guilt, or regret. Real family is not defined by wealth, status, or blood alone, but by who stays when life becomes difficult. Clara's sacrifices show the quiet strength many single mothers carry without recognition. While Annie represents the resilience of children forced to grow up too early because of poverty, betrayal, and injustice. Ethan's journey teaches that success means nothing if compassion is missing from our lives. The story also warns how pride, social status, and fear of public judgment can destroy innocent lives for years. In the end, the message is simple but powerful. Kindness given at the right moment can change destiny. And sometimes the people we are meant to love most arrive back into our lives when we finally learn how to open the gate instead of protecting it. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration,